In April 2025, China clamped down on 7 rare earth elements, the minerals that power F-35 jets, EV motors, and wind turbines. Within weeks, prices tripled. I'm David, and here's where it gets terrifying. The West realized it has no backup. One country just got the power to cripple an entire world. "17 elements most people have never heard of: neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, are now the chokehold on every advanced military and tech system in the world. They're not rare to find. What matters is processing them from ore into usable metal. And that's where the stranglehold tightens. China controls 85 to 90% of the global processing capacity. Not the mining, the refining. That distinction is everything. When China tightens its grip on the refinery side, it doesn't matter how much rare earth ore sits in mines across Australia, California, or Africa. The metal you actually need to build an F-35 engine or a wind turbine magnet comes through Beijing. And in April 2025, China made that leverage explicit. Those restrictions hit because rare earths aren't optional extras. They're fundamental to how advanced weapons and engines work. Neodymium makes permanent magnets that spin rotors in F-35 jet engines and electric vehicle motors. Dysprosium and terbium are additives in the grain boundaries of those magnets, reinforcements that allow them to withstand the extreme heat and magnetic stress of a fighter jet at altitude or an EV motor accelerating at full power. Without these additives, the magnet fractures. The engine fails. The weapon system stays on the ground. Wiki, F-35 jet engine manufacturing, every cruise missile guidance system, every submarine sonar array, every wind turbine built outside China depends on rare earth magnets processed in Beijing. Not mined, processed. That distinction is critical. The final magnet product that goes into an F-35 engine is made in Chinese facilities, in configurations the US hasn't learned to replicate domestically. It's not a policy question, it's a physics constraint. The real question isn't whether rare earths matter, it's what happens when Beijing turns off the tap. China didn't inherit this power. It built it methodically. Starting in the 1990s, state-backed Chinese companies underpriced Western rare earth producers by margins that made competition impossible. California's Mountain Pass mine, the world's leading producer at the time, shut down in 2002. Australian operations scaled back. Within a decade, the West had walked away from processing entirely, and Beijing had absorbed the capacity. This wasn't a market accident. It was a strategic sacrifice. China took losses for years to own the refinery. The payoff came slowly, but it came. By 2010, China controlled nearly 95% of global rare earth processing. Competitors quit. Alternative supply chains evaporated. By 2025, that dominance was so complete that Western defense planners barely registered it, until Beijing decided to remind them it existed, and the leverage went from dormant to active overnight. Then, in April 2025, Beijing made its move. China's Ministry of Commerce announced export licenses would be required for 7 rare earth elements, specifically dysprosium and terbium, and for any downstream products containing them: permanent magnets, electronic components, advanced ceramics. Not a ban. Licenses mean bureaucracy, delay, leverage. A company in Germany needing terbium-laced magnets for wind turbines had to apply to Beijing, wait for approval, and hope it came through before production deadlines slipped. It's not an embargo you can see, it's a bottleneck you can't escape. The message was clear. If the West wanted these materials, it would negotiate on Beijing's terms. For the first time since the 1990s, the West had to face what it had built into its own supply chains, and the answer was terrifying. Watch the orange line climb. Terbium went from 1,400 a kilogram in January 2025 to 4,000 by June 2026, a 188% surge in 18 months. Dysprosium tripled. Spot prices outside China now sit 6 times higher than Beijing's domestic prices, a gap that erases Western competitiveness before production even starts. The price surge was just the surface problem. Pentagon audits confirmed that F-35 jet engines, cruise missile guidance systems, and submarine sonar arrays all depend on rare earth magnets processed in China. Not sourced from China. Processed. The difference matters. A mine in Australia can produce ore. A factory in California can refine some of it. But the final magnets that go into the engine? Wiki, Pentagon Military Supply Chain Audit. That work still happens in Chinese facilities, often in configurations the US can't replicate domestically. When the Pentagon ran its supply chain audit in early 2025, the finding was blunt. The world's most advanced fighter jet is held hostage to a mineral restriction announced in Beijing. It's not a hypothetical risk, it's not a future problem, it's active. Right now. If Beijing tightens the license requirements further, F-35 production slows. If they embargo the West entirely, like they did to Japan in 2010, the engine pipeline dries up in months. The obvious answer is to build new processing capacity outside China. For a decade, the US and Australia have funded rare earth processing plants, MP Materials in California, Lynas in Australia, to break dependence on Beijing. But capacity still lags mining by years, and the economics are brutal. Chinese domestic prices sit around 60 a kilogram. MP Materials quotes 110 for domestic US production, and even that requires a Pentagon price floor guarantee to stay solvent. Without subsidy, new capacity dies. With subsidy, it's expensive and slow. By June 2026, alternative processing capacity covers maybe 15 to 20% of Western needs, leaving the gap to be filled by Chinese imports, the same bottleneck that just spiked prices 6 times over. Every month of delay is another month of leverage Beijing holds. The West built this trap itself, and now it's paying to escape it. Beijing has actually run this playbook before. In 2010, Japan and China had a maritime dispute over islands in the East China Sea. Tensions climbed. China responded by cutting off rare earth exports to Japan entirely. An embargo, not a license bottleneck. Wiki, 2010, China-Japan rare earth embargo incident. Within weeks, Japanese manufacturers couldn't find dysprosium or terbium at any price. Factories had to pause production. Prices spiked. The economic pressure mounted. Within months, Japan capitulated on the territorial dispute. The embargo ended. And Beijing had proven something crucial. It could weaponize control of processing, force concessions from advanced industrial nations, and suffer almost no cost because rare earths are non-critical for Chinese domestic industry. They're inputs to other people's supply chains. 16 years later, Beijing's leverage is vastly stronger. The West is more dependent on rare earth electronics. China's processing capacity is even more dominant, and Xi's government is willing to use it. But here's the question that determines everything. Some of China's rare earth restrictions hurt its own export industries, magnet makers, EV producers, tech companies that rely on downstream rare earth components all operate inside China and pay full price. Beijing is unlikely to cut off the entire West with a full embargo, because each escalation narrows the exit ramp, and the goal seems to be leverage, not economic war. What Xi appears to want is leverage without rupture, restrict enough to cause pain, create enough uncertainty to force renegotiation on trade, tariffs, tech access, geopolitical alignment. The restrictions are a message: play ball on our terms, or this gets worse. It's coercive, but not suicidal. Beijing still exports rare earths. It just charges more and takes its time approving licenses. And that alone, the friction, the uncertainty, the 6 times price gap, is enough to cripple Western supply chains without any physical embargo. It's the economic equivalent of a stranglehold that tightens incrementally. The race is now clear, and the stakes have clarified. The EU's Critical Raw Materials Act targets supply independence. The US has signed long-term contracts with domestic producers. Allied governments are treating rare earth supply chains as explicitly strategic infrastructure, not commodity markets. The question is crude. Can diversification outpace Beijing's next escalation? Or will China's processing monopoly give it permanent veto power over the West's defense and technology future? There's no winner in economic strangulation. It hurts Beijing's customers eventually. But there's no cost in wielding the threat. The West built this vulnerability into its own supply chains. For years, nobody noticed. Then China showed the knife. Now the race is whether the West can rewire its economy faster than Beijing is willing to tighten the grip. The knife is out and the clock is running. If the West doesn't move fast, Beijing has built something more dangerous than a weapon, a permanent off switch on the entire future. Subscribe if this matters to you. I'm David. See you next time.